All right, adjusting the volume. So, well, I didn't really have much going on right now, so I thought it would be best if I just did this review right now. So, I'm probably, as I said on Twitter, the next 9 weeks will be me reviewing the nine Star Wars films in the Skywalker Saga. So, with that being said, I'm gonna review these movies in the order that they were released. So I'm not gonna start at episode one. I'm gonna start at I think the title kind of gave it away. Anyhow, to me, this movie, I think what's more impressive than the fact that it spawned a huge franchise is really the fact that this was kind of a really big break for George Lucas. I mean, he'd done two films at this point. One was not that well received. The second was American Graffiti, which became a significant hit. So this is kind of his George Lucas's chance to prove that he was a very capable filmmaker. And it took a lot of time. The film went over budget. A lot of crazy stuff happened, and Lucas, I think, even lost his voice at one point. But this was kind of like the one moment where you work your ass off, and you're never gonna have to work this hard again to be successful, kind of. So with A New Hope, I think we all know the story. Basically, a rebel alliance is facing this evil empire that's trying to take over the galaxy, and two droids from the Resistance end up in the hands of a young farmer named Luke, who ends up going on this cosmic quest to try and save the universe with a eccentric old man named Obi-Wan and a smartass smuggler named Han Solo. Do I even need to say who played these characters? Um yeah, so honestly, the one thing I can say about this movie is that the characters, they're not really that complex in this movie. I mean, some are, some aren't, but they still serve the story well, and they do a great job at fulfilling their purpose in the plot. Luke is a good wide-eyed innocent that's kind of like the audience avatar for all this crazy stuff that's going on. Um, Obi-Wan is a good mentor. You know, he's kind of the calm, laid back, but you know, optimistic. Um, Han Solo, he's kind of an anti-hero, but he does become a hero near the end, as we all know. So that's kind of interesting to watch. And even though sometimes the dialogue can be a little weird, it's acted well enough that you can still buy these characters have emotion and you can still kind of see what they're saying. It's not like in the prequels where you have baffling dialogue that fits a Tommy Wiseau production more than an actual film. Um, and I think the, the special effects for this movie were very well done. This was back in the Stone Ages of ILM, and now they're like one of the best effects companies in the world. They're probably the best one out there. But at this point, they were literally hippies in a garage working on these models and these sets, and for the most part, the effects really do hold up. I mean, there's still a few scenes that look a little ropey, but you know, for a movie that's over 40 years old, they still look very good. And considering how low budget the film was, um, I do feel like that, judging by this movie alone, the Empire, we don't really know how they came to be or why they're evil. They're just evil. And they're actually, it's actually kind of interesting to see Vader. We don't really know much about Darth Vader yet, but we really do get the sense that this is the kind of guy that is hard. He's hard to beat. And there are some points where he's kind of a more calm villain who's kind of there in the background, and he doesn't really do anything that violent until a few parts, until right at the very beginning of the movie. Like he crushes a guy's neck and he almost chokes someone to death using this force. Um, but yeah, I mean, he is kind of menacing, but it's more of like the calm, menacing villain, not the. There's a difference between this movie and Empire, which I'll get to next week. But in this one, he's a little more subtle with his cruelty at times. He's a little more disciplined. Um, and Peter Cushing does a great job at being sort of this tough, strict kind of evil leader. And there are some points where he does have some charm, but it's kind of that old school charm where it's like he does kind of have some cool lines, but there are some points where he's just really a sick person. um, Overall, I really do feel like that this was a great way to start the Star Wars series, even though Lucas probably didn't really know how big this is going to get. Um, uh, I do really feel like this was kind of this is like one of the first major summer blockbusters, even though this technically came out in May. Um, and I think it launched several careers, and it just kind of ushered in Hollywood into a new era, or it kind of built on the new era that Jaws had created a few years beforehand. Um, I suppose if I were to complain about the movie, is that I think by today's standards, it's a little predictable. And sometimes, even though the acting is really well done, there are some times where the characters can get a little grating. I mean, Luke is not, it can be a little whiny at times, and Solo, his complaining is not as bad as Luke's whining necessarily, but there is kind of this arc where the Han Solo character sort of learns to be more selfless instead of selfish throughout the movie. And they expand upon that more and more in the other movies. It's kind of hard to review this movie without referencing the other films in the trilogy, but I'm really trying my best to focus on this one film. I'm probably not going to make as many trilogy references until I get to the end of each trilogy, the original, prequel, and sequel, but I think this was a very strong debut. And I also kind of think that this movie explains just enough for us to understand the world, but it leaves enough in mystery to make us more interesting to see more of it. And, well, 3 years later, we get a little bit more about the Force and a little bit more about the universe. So, I mean, obviously, I love this movie. Everyone does. There really isn't much I can say about this movie that hasn't been said before. So these reviews, most of these Star Wars reviews are probably going to be very short because I've talked about them a million times. But overall, it's easy to see why this film is a classic. It created one of the biggest franchises of all time, and it had an amazing sequel, which I'm going to talk about next week. So that's all I really have to say for the review. I will do my guitar cover on Monday of Bob Seger, and you will guys will all see what I do in the next few weeks. So see ya.